Hello. Hi, Lorette. Hi, Lisa. And Miranda. Good Shabbos. Happy Hanukkah. It was so much fun. When I opened up my Facebook page, Lisa, I saw a picture of us at your house at our beautiful Wednesday class. It says 5 years ago when we were all lighting menorah together. Hi, Barbara. Gary, whoa. Oh, Chaya. Okay, good. Hi, Phyllis. Hi, everybody. Hi, Stephanie. Beryl's birthday was today. Wow. How did you remember that? Hi, Jill. Hi, Sherry. Okay, I want to reward everybody from coming on time. So we have so much to learn tonight, and I love preparing for the class. It's so exciting. There's so much really, hi, Lorette, beautiful, beautiful learning to do. And gosh, I have so many Hanukkah stories. Oh, you're set up for Hanukkah. Oh, should I come? Is that at the police academy? The police something? Are they going to let me come with my police mask on? Anyway, I want to dedicate this class tonight to whoever needs a healing, a complete healing. Oh, it was Bracha Devorah-Leah's birthday, the same as Beryl's. I must call her to say happy birthday. How beautiful. Yes, yeah. Right, my grandchildren said they were eating so much ice cream cake. They're in winter in New York. I wouldn't even eat ice cream cake in summer in California. Okay, so let's begin. The Parsha this week is Vayishev. The month of Kislev has so many wonderful parshas and stories and so much about dreams in it. You know, we start off with Yaakov, and Yaakov has dreams, and then Lavan has dreams, and then Yosef has dreams, and then the butcher and the butler have dreams, and Pharaoh has dreams, and we have dreams. So really, people's dreams should be fulfilled. And I want to start off with a story. I actually was going to tell a different story tonight to start off, but I'm going to save that story for another time because I have so many Hanukkah stories. So I want to tell a story about Hanukkah. And I might have told it to you before, but some of you haven't heard it. So I don't remember how many years ago, it was a long time ago, that Shlomo and I were invited to Vienna, Austria, hi, Debbie. Wow. Roll call. Okay, roll call's over. Whoever's not here now is late. Shlomo and I were invited to Vienna, Austria, to speak for an organization called European Center for Jewish Students. And it was run by a wonderful person. His name was Yossi Wax, and his wife at the time, Devorah-Leah. And they were the head of this organization. And this organization was not those students, but people in their 20s and 30s from 18 countries. And the common language was English. And for many years, we were brought out as scholars in residence, mainly because my husband had a very loud voice. And there were 500 people that were there over Shabbos. It was actually a 5-day seminar. But 500 people over Shabbos, and he was the only one with a voice loud enough to even give a 10-minute Devar Torah that could be heard, and other reasons that we were chosen. So we went for many years. It was many different cities in Europe, but this year that we went, it was in Vienna, and it was very exciting to us. I think I might have mentioned this before, but since it's a Hanukkah story, I'm going to mention it again. And my husband's family and my family both are from Vienna. So it was over New Year's Eve. Every year they do this gathering over New Year's Eve in different countries. And this year it was for 5 nights. And this particular year, Hanukkah the 7th night of Hanukkah was actually New Year's Eve. So let's say we got there maybe on a Tuesday, and we were there till the following Tuesday. We were there for a week, and so we were able to celebrate Hanukkah there. So they told us that to bring a formal dress because their custom was to have a ball, B-A-L-L. Not a good time, not a fun time, not a, wild time, but a ball, meaning, dancing and music, and they call it a ball. They're very into their balls in Vienna. And so they told us to bring formal clothes, and there was going to be a Hanukkah celebration. And it was very interesting because all the security were Israelis. And when we arrived, we were met, everybody thought we were some famous people. I guess we were famous people. And for the people that picked us up, there were photographers, and there were these drop-dead gorgeous Israeli security guards, and they picked us up in a stretch limo, and with flashing cameras, and so those security guards were there the whole time. And when we were going out, like one of the nights, to a disco, which the ECJS took over, and we were having our own Jewish music and our own party in this disco, they only let people leave the hotel like in groups of maybe 20, not more. So there's a few hundred people, and it was only 2 blocks away, so you would walk. But for security, and years ago, that's how intense and sad to say, we as Jews have to have that level of security in some of these countries still today. And so it was just really it was such an interesting experience because they were so respectful. They really were, the 20s and 30-year-olds were respectful. And the goal also was not only to up their level of Judaism, but for people to meet from these countries where they might have had, they grew up in cities with 1 Jew, 2 Jews. There were Jews from Luxembourg. I only know Luxembourg because I used to take Icelandic Airlines back and forth from America to Europe. And there were 8 Jews only that lived in the whole town, city, country of Luxembourg. And there was a young woman from there. And people did meet and people did marry from these gatherings. So New Year's Eve came, and it was the 7th night of Hanukkah, and they brought in one of the most famous chefs from Israel, and they had this incredible band from Holland, and they told us to dress formally, and so I wore a Shabbos dress, which is like my weekday dress, but I just say it's a Shabbos. I just make it into a Shabbos dress. And Shlomo comes downstairs in a suit, and he comes down with a menorah tie, and he comes down with on the menorah tie, a flashing, one of those flashing pin menorahs. And then he comes also with his ears with earrings, one flashing red earring and one flashing blue earring. That was his formal wear for Hanukkah. And of course, needless to say, he was the hit of the party. But right before midnight was when we lit the menorah. And it was so interesting to me because I don't know if it would happen here in America, but there, the respect and the quiet and the boys scrambling to look for yarmulkes or something to put on their head. And right before midnight, Shlomo lit the menorah. And it was something really spectacular. 500 European Jews from so many different countries, speaking so many different languages, all united to bring the light of Hanukkah into the place that was one of the darkest places in Europe, where certainly my husband's family and my family, many of them died in that place, in that city, died in hiding, died running from the Nazis. So it was really quite an uplifting experience to have Hanukkah in Vienna. So I want to go into the Parsha, and then we'll end with something on Hanukkah. So Parsha's Vayishev, it starts off that the Maggid of Mezrich, remember we learned about him last week, it was his yahrzeit on Yud Tes Kislev. He was the teacher of the Alter Rebbe and the student of the Baal Shem Tov. So he comments on the first verse of this week's Parsha, and it says, and Yaakov, meaning Jacob, dwelled in the land of his father's sojourning, where he dwelt, as follows. It says, and Jacob dwelled. And Jacob was settled and in the land in earthliness, okay, in earthliness. So it says, why? Why did he settle? He was such a lofty person. Why does it say he was settled, like grounded in earthliness? It says, in order to gather together the sparks of holiness that are in material things, and to sublimate those sparks to God above. And it says that when a person comes down into this world, a sojourning, a tarrying in earthliness, in being in the mundane physical world, is a degradation, it's a descent. But the descent is only temporary. And it's this descent that leads to an ascent, that leads to a spiritual elevation. And we will go into this a little more. So it says, the Torah continues that he dwelt in the land Canaan, and Canaan refers to trading, meaning trading means you spend money and you get a profit. And it says then, there he scatters and increases. So what does this mean? So it says that the term Canaan means that it's a descent for a purpose of elevation. And the scattering and increasing is of the material nature, meaning when one is involved with materiality, it leads to the enhancement of the spiritual if one can release the sparks of holiness that are contained within the material. And it says that one doesn't need to do big things. It doesn't have to be, monumental things. It's in the small things. It's in the details. To gather and to purify and to elevate the sparks of holiness that exist in earthly matters. And it says, and the task, why do we do this? Because God wanted a dwelling place in this physical world. He wanted to dwell in this physical world, to reveal holiness in physicality. To reveal holiness in the upper worlds where it's all holy is not, the task. The task is to reveal it in the place where it's most hidden and concealed. And it says Israel is compared to a bee. So it says, just like everything the bee gathers is for the hive and for its owner, so to Israel, whatever they do, meaning the people of Israel, is for God, is for their Father in heaven. So, I just want to check a footnote. Okay. So one doesn't want to have ulterior motives. One wants to make sure that their spiritual work, their avoda is pure. And it's easier to keep it pure, to keep it simple, and to deal with simple matters. So when we are involved with things that are in the nature of a sublime nature of reason and understanding, we could have ulterior motives, because that's when the I is involved. That's when the thinking is involved. But when one is involved in simplicity, one doesn't have ulterior motives on that level. And the previous Rebbe said that the simplicity of ordinary people unites them with the simplicity of the divine essence. Meaning the essence of divinity is pure simplicity. And how do we know that? Because there's the concept of unity of God. So here too, the simple avoda, the simple spiritual work with simple matters, is bound up with the simplicity of the divine essence. Okay, I'm saying simplicity of the divine essence. We all get it's not so simple. Okay, but this is what the Rebbe is teaching, that there is a simplicity divine essence. Welcome, Ora. And it says that what is it? It's the quality of what we call Kabbalah soul. We talk about Kabbalah soul so much in this class, meaning that we are going in the direction of what God wants us to do. We're submitting our will to God's will. We're doing what's godly. We're doing what's holy. Because we're like soldiers. What do soldiers do? Soldiers follow the orders of what they are obligated to do. And there are many things in life that that are leading us in the direction of a connection with God, and to wear that yoke of God around us. And what does the yoke mean? It means just like you have oxen that you put a yoke on. And so the yoke is like blinders. So they can only see what's straight ahead of them. They don't go to the right, they don't go to the left, they just go straight ahead. And that's what it means, Kabbalah Soul, wearing the yoke of heaven. We're going forward in our connection and our service of God. So this is the meaning of Jacob settled in the land of his father's sojourning. So it says, what is the aspect of his father, of God, really? That spiritual work that is totally, solely devoted to God above. And it says it signifies a simple service. You're not trying to outwit anybody. You're not using your cunning. It's just you're going forward with simplicity. And it says this is the way we become bound up with God. And this is what Yaakov is teaching us. He busied himself with the task of what we call birurim, means the purification, the spiritual purification of the mundane and the material. So what did he do? He went to Haran. Remember, we talked about him going to Haran in the last few weeks, and he worked for Lavan with the flocks, and he exerted himself. He worked hard physically. It says, by day the heat consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. But there was actual physical hardship. And it says, according to Torah law, a person is not allowed to harm themselves physically or mortify their own body. This is not a path to choose. That's why I like going to the spa. I want to prove that I'm not mortifying my body. And it's why? Because our body is a house to serve God in. You cannot harm your body. So it says that the Alter Rebbe brings down that a person can only cause hardship to their body when it will serve a personal need, which means, let's say you have to physically work hard because you need to earn money. So then you have to do that. But what is the ultimate inner meaning of that? Is the spiritual purification, the spiritual refinement of the material. It says, Yaakov did not ask any questions. He had this Kabbalah soul. He just went ahead and did his task, and he dealt with that level of purification. He just went forward. There was no fetching, no complaining. He just went forward. And he did it with eagerness and joy. That's a big deal, to do it with eagerness and joy. And it says, and how do we know this? Because it said he lifted his feet, and that represents the joy. And it says, and also we know that his children that he had brought back were perfect. Like my children are perfect. That's one of them is watching, the perfect one. But it says that everything he brought back with him, he had refined. He had done this quality of birurim, of purifying the sparks, and he was able to bring everything back with him in perfection. And it says he purified all these sparks of holiness that were found in Lavan, and even those that were found in Esav. And how do we know this? That he brought forth what's called a transcendent aspect upon Esav, and he affected even that Esav kissed him wholeheartedly. So the footnote is saying that Jacob busied himself with the spiritual work of this birurim, extracting and purifying the sparks of holiness that were concealed in materiality, concealed in material things. And it says, now this is from last week's Parsha, and it's very intricate teaching, and it's very detailed, but in its simplified form, it says, Yaakov bowed to the earth 7 times. So each time that he was walking towards Esav, which was in last week's Parsha, he bowed, and then he got up, and he bowed, and he got up. And it says he did that 7 times. And he stepped near to his brother, And he gathered all the holy sparks by that bowing until he was able to reach his brother Esav. And he gathered all the good that was in Esav to the point that Esav was able to allow that good to emerge from him, to be openly seen. And then Esav ran towards him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. And he kissed him wholeheartedly, because Yaakov was able to draw forth that inner goodness from Esav and bring out that spiritual side, the real true inner core that was hidden in there, causing this supernatural transcendence to encompass both of them. And that was what happened with this kiss. That when you have somebody who is inspiring, that person is actually able to draw forth from a person the good that's in them. We can see that in school in a teacher. I can give you actually an example that happened today. So one of my children brought over her children to swim, and one of them has turned into a teenager and was very annoying to his brothers, extremely annoying. And everybody was getting very irritated. And then they left, and he came back into the house to get some water. And I said, would you like a job? I have a job for you, and I pay very well. And could you come to my house one day, and I have a whole pool room I want to clean out and this and that. And it was like, and I know you're the best person for the job. And I know that's why I'm asking you, and you're going to do the best job. And afterwards, my daughter texts me. She goes, I don't know what you said to him, but he came back into the car a different person. You know, that's what we need to do. Instead of that level of coming down on someone, we have to be able to find the good and somehow draw the good out that's already inside them. And we gain spiritually when we do this. So it says that this avoda of the purification of the material and the mundane, and going in this direction of following the will of God, living a godly life, it says penetrates to the very core of a person's soul. And it affects a redemption in the person and in the community around them. So that's one idea from the beginning of the Parsha. Another idea relates to Joseph. So all the stories about Joseph are like so exciting, so interesting. So it says he was of handsome form and handsome appearance, and he curled his hair. And it says, because of this, the wife of his master lifted up her eyes to Joseph, and subsequent events that led him to prison ensued. And no matter what he did there, God made him to prosper. So I'm not going to go into the whole story, because we're going to go into it a little bit later on about the story of when he's in Egypt and he's working for one of the Pharaoh's generals, Potiphar, and he has an encounter with Potiphar's wife. And we're going to go into that a little later. But right now, there are two aspects in this story. The first relates to Joseph, that says he was handsome of form and handsome in appearance. And the second part of the story relates to the wife of Potiphar. So it says, and I just want to repeat that everything we study and everything we learn has day-to-day significance for our life. So it says that in regards to Joseph, it says, may the eternal, this is written in the Torah in the text, it says, may the eternal add to me ben acher, another son. So one of the previous rabbis, called the Tzemach Tzedek, interpreted this as saying that the spiritual work of Yosef was to transform another into a son. In other words, to make balei tshuva, to make a person return to God. Someone who is outside your sphere becomes like your son, like your daughter, like your sister, like your brother. And Joseph was able to do this by virtue of his being of handsome form and handsome appearance. He was handsome. He was beautiful in every respect, with his positive mitzvahs and with his negative, observing the negative commandments. And it says the word form relates to the positive commandments and the term appearance relates to the negative commandments. And he was able to impress by his integrity others and transform otherness into sonness. He was able to inspire people, not to inspire them to change, but to inspire them to rise to their whole highest self. Because within people, this higher good exists. And what you're doing is you're kind of polishing those buttons for them and raising it up. And it says, and in order to be effective, one must remember the principle of first adorn yourself and then adorn others. Meaning that it's not that one should postpone the concern for another until one is perfect in themselves, because then you'll never do that. It says that one has to become involved with others without delay, but one has to work on themselves also. One can't just work on somebody else. One has to, in the meantime, correct their own deficiencies. And you often are given that opportunity to do it when you work with somebody else, because you have to draw on the best that you have. And it says, when one neglects to correct their own faults, other people will sense this and resist being influenced. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard from people, when, you want to inspire people to make a deeper connection to Judaism and to really, for themselves, and for the Jewish nation. We need everybody. And they'll say, oh, I know this person, I know this rabbi, I know this uncle, I know this. They said they were religious, but they were horrible people, Okay, yeah. People can say they are what they are. It's what do we call it? It's an expression called a tzaddik in pelts. What's a tzaddik in pelts? A tzaddik means the righteous person in pelts, in a fur coat, meaning that a person might have the right. Because if you don't do that, it will be harmful to others as well as to yourself. It's interesting. I remember speaking to different parents, who wanted their kids to eat healthy. So if you want your kids to eat healthy, do not put Coca-Cola on the table for yourself. Your actions have to follow your words. And it's interesting because I was just asked yesterday, and I have to write the letter tonight, to write a birthday wish for a man. His name is Chaim Lakov, who's really responsible for opening a place to me when I came from India and I was ready to go back, and teaching me Torah from the beginning. And one of the things that I saw in this person was his integrity in his words and his actions. And I guess the thing that impressed me most was not only he was such a mensch and such a righteous person, but every night before he would go to classes or learn or whatever he did, he helped put all his kids to bed. He did all the dishes in the house. He was just had that ability his actions followed the words that he spoke coming out of his mouth. So it says the greatest efforts have to be exerted for one's own form and appearance, because it doesn't only affect you, it affects everyone around you. We are interconnected. And unless you're going to live on top of a mountain, well, now we're not so interconnected, but we will be interconnected again. I do feel connected. Like when I talk to all of you and I don't see you, I still know you're there and I feel your energy and I do feel that connection. But what we do affects each of us. It's that story of being in a rowboat and somebody's drilling a hole under their seat. Like, mind your own business. It's my seat. I could do what I want. Well, that's actually not the way it works. Okay. Now, we have also this incident with Potiphar's wife, where she tried to seduce Yosef, and it says that her motives were pure. So she tried to get Yosef to have relations with her. And why does it say that her motives were pure? Because she saw that she and Yosef would share the same descendants. That she saw that their descendants would be the same. And people used, astrologers and interpreters of dreams and people who saw into the future. So she understood that. And so she rationalized her actions of seducing Yosef because he was supposed to have descendants with her. It was very clear. But her vision of the future was incorrect. And who were the descendants from? Was that Yosef would marry her daughter Asnat, and those descendants would be from that daughter. But it says that and there was no basis for her reason. Like we can take our reasoning and we can make any excuse for what we want to do and what our behavior is, but there was no basis to that. There was no excuse for that. And it says that the lesson is that we have to see what God wants us to do in each event, and it will unfold for us. We don't have to create it ourselves. We have to be open to it, but we don't have to create it. Hi, Stella. So, and Sarah. Okay, so it says the Alter Rebbe, to continue, discusses in Tanya that the concept that a person can be at prayer and that then they're disturbed by a heathen that's disturbing their prayer. And it says that the Jews should not be affected, but on the contrary, that disturbance should strengthen the person to pray with a greater devotion from the depths of the heart. So, hi, Linda. So because I see Sarah's name, I want to tell a story from Sfat, where I first met Sarah. So when my husband was learning in Sfat with Yisroel Benjamin Sandler, they were chavrusas together in Sfat, and they were in a synagogue, and there was a man there. I guess he thought he was trying to pray. It was before the services were starting, before the davening was starting, and my husband and Yisroel Benjamin were talking. And this man got very, very aggravated, he was disturbed by them. And he turned around and he yelled at them. So Yisroel Benjamin said to my husband, "Do you want to see how we handle this in Sfat?" And Shlomo said, "Sure." And he got up and he went over to the man and he put his face between his hands like this, holding his face, and he gave him a big kiss. And the guy started to laugh. So that's a little side note. That's another option in strengthening yourself. But it says here that we shouldn't let other people disturb us. We should strengthen ourselves to pray for greater devotion from the depths of our heart. And it says because maybe that person was placed there just in order to arouse you to pray longer, harder, stronger, with greater devotion. That it says that one has to view the disturbance, like everything that comes in life, as divine providence. That everything, it says, is in the hands of heaven except fear of heaven. And God has many deputies to achieve his purpose. I like being a deputy. I always like being deputized, and I like to deputize people. So it says that why is it that this heathen that's disturbing the person, why does it suggest that it's for another purpose? Why does it suggest that it has another purpose? So it says because that person that is disturbing is not thinking that they're doing it to test that person's holiness. That person could be malicious also. But the fact that it comes in front of you, that it comes before you, means, like I take this wonderful meditation class. I always try to push this class. It comes from Sfat, the holy city of Sfat, Talarot, Talorot. Go on the website. So my class there's a class Wednesday mornings for beginners. I take a class for people who've taken it for a long time on Tuesdays. And Tuesday morning seems to be gardening day in my neighborhood. I don't know why. And the gardening is worse at 10 o'clock, between 10 and 12 when I'm doing my meditation class. And I love sitting outside. I'm a fresh air addict. I don't like being inside too much. That's why having Friday night dinners in 40-degree weathers with a few guests outside during COVID doesn't bother me. And every time that I hear that the blowers and the lawnmowers and I'm just sitting down to meditate, I'm always thinking of this passage by the Alter Rebbe. It's almost like that is there to strengthen me, that I'm trying to make it into like white noise in the background so that it won't be irritating to me and I could just like go with the flow of it. It's the divine providence of the moment. I'm not on that desert island by myself, thank God. Okay. So it says that even the disturbances are a means to add to holiness, to contribute to the purpose of holiness. Even if it's something that's against holiness, it's the opposite of holiness. Because everything in our life is really to strengthen us to go in the direction of holiness, to go forward, to have that Kabbalah soul that we were talking about, to serve God. So it says, even Lavan, the wicked Lavan, who is the father-in-law of Yaakov, even his pursuit was to serve. He was pursuing Yaakov, and even that pursuit was to have additional words of Torah. It was for a holy purpose. So there is instruction relating to all of us. Remember, again, everything here is not a story. Everything in the Torah is a teaching for us in 2020. And it says that everything is about concealment and obstruction in divine service, because it's only concealing the holiness that's inside it. Everything is conducive to holiness, and it's sometimes channeled in ways that we might not be able to see it and not be able to grasp it right away, but in its essence, it is an aid and a contribution to holiness. And it says that we have to realize, and this is a really difficult concept, that no evil descends from on high, that we see obstructions and we see concealments and we see this, but in reality, we are trying to strive for holiness. That we need not just only to take things at face value, but to find what is the divine providence, the hashgacha pratis, within each thing. And whoever stays till the very end of the class, I have a mind-blowing story about divine providence, but I'm not going to tell it to the end, okay? Because it has to do with Hanukkah, but if it's too late past your bedtime, you can always listen to it later on this Facebook or on YouTube. But it's a story I heard from my teacher, Rabbi Brander, that is just really mind-blowing. Okay, so it says that when there is an obstruction, it doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily mean that a person has to be weak from it. What an obstruction can do is can strengthen a person. Terry, an obstruction can stimulate a greater power and strength inside the person. So going on, the Rebbe is saying that everything possesses a divine spark and everything contributes to holiness, and that the obstruction itself is an awakening and uncovering of the holy spark, maybe even the person's own holy sparks, and it will become manifest in this material world, that we have an ability to make it manifest in this material world. And if anybody would like to pick up see this lovely high center cups? I have like hundreds of them. Not hundreds, but I have maybe 100 of them. Robin, I don't know if she's here tonight, but not only did she deliver them to me, but she toiveled every single one in a mikveh. So you don't even have to do that. Okay. So this is the lesson from the statement of the sages that is saying that the wife of Potiphar acted out of pure motives. There are two approaches. One is to battle the obstruction, meaning to regard it as a true concealment and obstacle, and to exert all efforts to fight it. And the second is to recognize that it is an aid to holiness and to awaken the true nature of the thing that is being worked on to manifest itself, so the obstruction will actually add to the light of holiness. And why will the obstruction add to the light of holiness? Because it's hiding those divine sparks that are within it, and it's definitely revealing the divine sparks. So I want to say hi to Yerushalayim. There are a few people here, Nomi and Sarah Lydia, and maybe a few others. Hindela will pop in. Okay, so I'm going to continue, and we're going to talk about Yosef. So I'm going to read from the text, and then we're going to go over do some commentaries on it. So it says that Yosef's brothers saw that his father loved him more than all his brothers, so they hated him, and they could not speak with him peacefully. And he said to them, "Listen to this dream I had." And then he says the dream. "There we were binding sheaves in the midst of the field. When my sheaf stood up and remained upright, then your sheaves formed a circle around my sheaf and prostrated themselves before it." And then again, he had another dream, and he told his brothers, "Look, I had another dream, and there were the sun, the moon, and 11 stars prostrating themselves before me." So it goes on to talk about, we're going to talk about that really just only a little. So it says that they hated him. It says clothing as opposed to food. We're talking about now that his father also gave him this coat of many colors. If you ever saw that play, I think I actually walked out on the play Joseph and the Technicolor Dream Coat. I don't even know how I got there, but I left because I thought I don't know. I don't even remember why. Okay, so it says that clothing as opposed to food serves us from the outside. We do not internalize it. Food we internalize, but clothing we don't. So metaphorically, it says clothing represents spirituality that remains transcendent from us because of its loftiness. It has a level that we call makif. And the fact that Yaakov gave Joseph a robe means that he gave him insights of such transcendence that they couldn't be internalized. And of all the brothers, it says only Joseph was spiritually advanced enough to receive these lofty insights, and his brothers were therefore jealous of him. And this spiritual jealousy devolved into petty jealousy, which led to their hatred of Yosef. So I'm going to do a teaching from the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe about the dreams of Yosef. So he has two dreams, and it says that both had the same meaning that Yosef would rule over his brothers and that they would pay homage to him. And the second dream merely added the sun and the moon, which referred to Jacob, his father, and Bilhah. And Bilhah was the woman who raised him. She was also a wife of, or a concubine wife of of Yaakov. She was the mother of some of the tribes, and she was the handmaid to Rachel, and she helped raise him. So he saw the sun and the moon as Yaakov and Bilhah. So there's a very striking parallel between this and next week's Parsha, which is Miketz, which relates the two dreams of Pharaoh. And his two dreams also shared a single meaning. It says in Pharaoh's case, the Torah states a reason why there should be two dreams. It says, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. But of Yosef's dreams, no explanation is given for their repetition, and we are forced to conclude that from these two dreams, that even though they seem alike in their meaning, they're really alluding to two different things. And what are those two different things? And what does that have to do with us? Because we always know that everything, again, I like to say it many, many times, that if this doesn't have to do with us, then it's not as important. Everything here that we're learning has to do with us. It's like now we're coming to the holiday of Hanukkah, which we're going to talk about after we do a little more on the Parsha. The holiday of Hanukkah, it's not like we're talking about a history holiday that happened now. We have to find the meaning and the aliveness in it for us today. So Joseph's actions are included in the works of the fathers because he brought his father's work to fruition in the world, because there is a quote from the Torah that says, "These are the generations of Jacob, ... Yosef." So Yosef's two dreams have the following difference. The first dream concerns things of the earth. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the midst of a field. And the second dream is about the heavens, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars. So we know that also both of Pharaoh's dreams had an earthly symbolism, regressing, in fact, from the domain of the living things, the 7 cows, to that of plants, the 7 ears of corn. So his dreams went down. So it says for Pharaoh, there was no attachment, there was no link to heaven. And his dreams were a digression from life to inanimate life, from life of the 7 cows to the plant life. But Joseph's dreams displayed an ascent in holiness. So there is a distinction between Joseph and Pharaoh, and this is one of the unique qualities of the Jew. That a Jew is simultaneously engaged in the material world and the spiritual world at the same time, involved in this world and the next world at the same time. And there's a story about the previous Rebbe that when he was arrested in Russia in 1927, and his interrogators threatened him with a revolver. So the Rebbes were mostly arrested for teaching Judaism, for only teaching Judaism, and for practicing Judaism. And when they would capture him, they wanted information. They wanted the name of the undergrounds and all of this information that the Rebbe wouldn't give. So the Rebbe's answer to the interrogator pointing the gun said, "Men who have many gods and one world are frightened by a revolver. A man who has one God and 2 worlds has nothing to fear." Meaning these 2 worlds are not separate in time. That there's this world and other world, but they're one world together. And it says the Jew is bound to a higher spiritual reality, even when engaged in the material world, in their everyday mundane life. A Jew is bound to a higher reality. The Jew stands on a ladder that's set on the earth, and the top reaches heaven. And the service moves from the mundane earthly service to the most exalted spirituality, always ascending. So we come to learn that the Torah is precise and every detail has a lesson, which has a bearing on the conduct of our life. Joseph's dreams were about two worlds, about the earth and the heaven. And they had a single meaning, that a Jew has to fuse this dual involvement, the material and the spiritual, into one. The material needs to contribute to the spiritual until the material itself is spiritual. The whole idea of physical acts like eating and drinking, etc., are directed towards serving God, and they are natural. And there's a story that Reb Shmuel, one of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbes, told to two of his children when they were discussing the virtues of being a Jew. And so he called over one of his servants to prove the point. And he said, Ben Sion, have you eaten? And the servant said, yes. And he said to him, did you eat well? And he said, I am satisfied, thank God. And he said, why did you eat? And he said, I ate in order to live. And why do you live? To be a Jew and do what God wishes. And with this, it says the servant sighed. So later on, the Rebbe told his children, you see, a Jew by his nature eats to live and lives to be a Jew and do what God has told him. There's a purpose. We have another purpose. We have our true purpose in the world. And still the Jew sighs that he has not yet reached this ultimate truth, that we're on a journey, we're on our way, and we want to know how we can do that, how we can serve God, how we can use whatever we have in our material existence. And we should have materiality. We should have material. We should have food, and we should have clothing, and we should have homes, and everything should be of the finest level. We're children of the King. We're children of the King, and we should be like that. But it needs to be in the service of God. And it says a Jew has spiritual intention in every physical act. The acts themselves are spiritualized. And in the words of the holy Baal Shem Tov, where a person's desires are, there that person is. So we have to really know that when we're using the physical, we're unconcealing the sparks that are there, and we're using them in the service of God. So this is the significance of the fact that Yosef had two dreams. And now we're going into the details. The first dream begins, we were binding sheaves in the midst of a field. It begins with work, an activity that's wholly absent from the dreams of the Pharaoh. In the domain of unholiness, which is work, the effort in the service of God, so it says this may be absent, meaning there are times we ate in Egypt free without the effort of the mitzvah of serving God. But the reward of holiness comes only through effort. And when the Jew ascends on the ladder from earth to heaven, from the very beginning, there is work and dedicating one's physical actions to holiness. And what was the nature of the work in Joseph's dream was the binding of the sheaves, that we're taking all those fragmented parts of ourself and we're binding them together. It says we are born into a world of concealment, which is like a field, in which things like stalks of grain, stalks of corn grow apart and live separately and live for themselves only. And what do we call this when it's within a human being, when it's within us? We call it, this orientation towards self is a reflection of what we call the animal soul, which creates diversity and separateness. I just have to say the cutest thing happened this week is that last Sunday, the holy Rabbi Shlomo Katz from Israel did a Zoom event for Yotes Kislev, honoring the Alter Rebbe. And he had a few speakers, and among the speakers, he asked my daughter Hindela to speak, and me. So Hindela spoke first, and I followed Hindela. So my son, Beryl, took a video of his kids, and his son, who is 7 years old, was driving in the car with his grandfather, who was listening to this Zoom talk, and he heard me, and he was very excited. So Beryl said, "What did you hear?" And he starts to give over this teaching about the divine soul and the animal soul, and I just thought, here it is, these holy words coming out of the mouth of a 7-year-old. Hearing these concepts, it goes in. If we don't understand it, eventually learning it, saying it, studying it, he's very lucky. He gets to learn in his simple 7-year-old way that he will come to understand what a godly soul is and what a divine soul is. But the fact that we don't have to be in conflict with ourselves, that we can know that we can have these different parts, and that's what we're trying to bind together in the sheaves that stood in the field when Yosef had his dream. So the animal soul creates diversity and separateness, and we have to go beyond that, binding like sheaves the many facets of our being into the unified service of God. And what is that service? It's a service that transcends self and separation. So in the dream, the sheaves, after they were bound, to bow down to Yosef's sheaf. And so for us, the next stage in our service must be bowing down, meaning the submission to that which is higher than us, that we form a unity. All Jews form a unity as if they were limbs of one body. And just like a body is coordinated when the muscles and the sinews respond to the central nervous system of the brain, so the spiritual health of the collective body of Jews is dependent on the responsiveness to their head, meaning the spiritual leader of the generation. So we know that for so many years, Moses was the spiritual leader of our generation, and that he was able to unify the people and lead them. And in every generation, we have spiritual leaders. And this is what it means by somebody submitting to people who can draw that holiness out of us, who can inspire us, who can give us that kind of beacon to know that this is a reality and this exists. And it says that this submission precedes the act of unifying one's existence in the service of God, to bind together all those disparate parts of oneself, comes from this inner submission to the spiritual leader of the generation, to somebody who we are able to see the holiness, to see visible holiness in. And it says that, but the outward manifestation of this service came from Yosef's dream. First, there was the binding, which was the binding together of the sheaves, and then there was the submission, which was the bowing to them. And this is the level of Yosef's first dream. And this level is still confined to the earth, which is the earth is the limits of physical existence. And we have to transcend the constraints of physicality, just as we learned in this previous piece about revealing the sparks that are concealed by obstruction, revealing those sparks in the material. And it says that we do this through the concept of tshuva, return, to be who we really are, to come to our real self, our real inner core being revealed, which is one of wanting to serve God and one of holiness. And it says that the soul and the body should stay together. We're not talking about the soul going up to God and leaving the body behind. No, we're talking about in the physical life, that we need to be united, but the body eventually should cease to conceal the light of the soul. And that can happen. And this is the ultimate purpose of the descent of a soul into a body within a physical existence, that the soul should retain its closeness to God, and it should be seen, that it should be visibly seen on the person. So it says that the act of submission to the head of the collective body of the Jewish people is repeated in the second dream, where the sun, moon, and the 11 stars, where they bow down. And this implies that this inward attitude is not restricted only to the Jew who's still working in the field, but also extends to the Jew who has reached the heavens. And I see Stephanie is asking a question. Is the bowing 7 times to Esav related to the sheaves and Paro and Yosef? No, it is different. And if you would like, there is a very intricate, detailed teaching about it, and you can be in touch with me, and I can give it over to you, because it's very powerful. But I'm not going to do it now. Okay. So it says that. So this is repeated. The submission is repeated in the second dream. And it says that it's talking to the person who's already achieved a certain level, a person who is already now ready for the next stage and no longer needs individual guidance to avoid the concealments and distortions of physical life, to bring about one's own spiritual growth. But still, even at that state, still in that state of more spiritual elevation, the person needs to be in harmony with other Jews. There also is this need for unity and harmony. So this is the path that's mapped out in the dreams of Yosef. First, there is the work in the field, the effort, the avoda to unify a world of separate existence and divided selves within the service of God, which is the binding of the sheaves. And it says that the reward of holiness must be worked for in this world. You know, it's not like going to the spa and, floating in the mineral water. I guess if we worked hard to make arrangements to get to the spa, that might be it. But it says that if a person says, I have labored and have not found a reward, do not believe them. If they say, I have not labored, but I have found a reward, believe them. And if they say, I have labored and I found, believe them. Because we need to work at these things. It doesn't come automatically. And it says that in Pirkei Avos, it's telling us when our will is nullified to God's will, it will follow that God will nullify the will of others to our will. In other words, this concealment that exists in the world, this concealment of holiness and disunity, will lose its power. It's just a concealment. On the surface, it looks separate and disparate and all of these things. But it will be open, this revelation of Yosef and the spiritual life that is available. And I just want to see if there's anything in these notes. So the sleep and dreams. So this month, Kislev is about sleep and dreams. And we know that Yaakov is in Haran, and he dreamt about the ladder and angels, and he dreamt about speckled sheep, and then Lavan had a dream. And this parsha begins with dreams. Okay, and we're going to learn more about the dreams. But Yosef's dreams ultimately are teaching us how to serve God. And it says that Yosef's service was a direct extension of his father Yaakov. And his father Yaakov was the leader of the generation. And it says that a messenger, a shliach, is like the one who sends them. So that Yosef had those qualities of his father. And it says that all of Yaakov's children merited to be Jews, and his brothers were shepherds, but Yaakov had a different talent, and he had the talent of Yaakov's influence. So to continue, one second. Okay, hold on. You're not going anywhere because you were all waiting for that great story at the end. No. Okay. Let me find my place. Okay. So it says here, I'm just going to do bits of the Parsha. I really want to encourage everybody to learn this week's Parsha and to learn it with commentary. It is just so beautiful and it's so deep. And if you don't have your own personal Chumash Torah at home, you can go on Chabad.org. They have copies of it. You can look up Vayishev. There are commentaries, there are videos, there are audios, there are written. Don't miss this week's Parsha. Because one of the things we learned from the Alter Rebbe, who last week was his liberation from prison and the spreading of Hasidus, is the concept of live with the times, meaning live with the Torah reading of the week. And it's so encouraging. You know, we need, in our world today, we need to find those lights. We need to find the encouragement. We must keep our spirits up, because when you keep your spirits up, it protects your immune system and you get to stay healthy, you know, and you get to be here when Mashiach comes. That's it. Okay. So here we go, and it says that his brothers took Yosef and they threw him into a pit. And the pit was empty and there was no water in it. So this briefly, the storyline is, if you aren't up on your Chumash, the storyline is that his brothers wanted to kill him. And it's a very intricate discussion, which I am not going to go into now, of that they convened what's called a Beis Din, and they discussed it, and a lot of ins and outs, and Reuven convinced them, because he was the oldest, and to throw him in a pit instead. Okay, and here we're going to go into some details of what that means and why they threw him and what it is. So, okay, so it says Reuven knew that Joseph's chances were better with the snakes and scorpions. If he was killed outright, then there would not be a chance, and he felt that he would be fully to blame for it. So he thought that God gives free choice to human beings and allows them to act even in opposition to his will. It says that we are so distant from God that we can actually go against the will of God, to think that we're independent beings and we can go against the will of God. And we are shown that, we are shown in our current life, we are shown every day that we are not in control. So, but we think we are. And there are things that people can do, like murder their brother, which would be so in opposition to the will of God. So Reuven reasoned that he and his brothers could kill Joseph unjustifiably. There was no they couldn't even, you can't even justify killing him. But snakes and scorpions, who are subject to God's will, would not kill Joseph if he was guiltless. They were feeling he was guilty because he told on them. And the reason he told on them was not as a tattletale. It was about a Torah concept, which is too time consuming to go into. But if anybody could call me and I'll tell you, but it is interesting. But if he would die with the snakes, and if you were, God forbid, if someone was thrown in a pit and there were snakes and scorpions, that person would not come out alive. And how do we know that? Because it says, even if we grant that there is a possibility that a person can survive being cast into a pit of snakes and scorpions, the probability of this occurring is so small that it is negligible. For that reason, Jewish law permits a woman to remarry if reliable witnesses testify that her husband fell into such a pit, even though they did not actually see him dead. So a woman is not allowed to marry, or a man, unless you have proof that the spouse died. And it says here that it's so certain that anyone who would fall into a pit of snakes and scorpions would die, that if a man fell into a pit, somebody saw him fall into a pit, but they left, and they never saw if he was dead or not, his wife would be given permission to remarry because it would be certain that he would be dead. So this was not a good circumstance to throw Yosef into a pit of snakes and scorpions. But everything we know is divine providence. So if God did not want Yosef to be killed, he would somehow prevent the brothers from killing him. But Reuben knew that when a person is in danger, only a miracle can save them. And how does the heavenly court decide this? Because they decide whether the person has the merit to be saved. And the greater the danger, the greater the miracle that's required. And the greater the miracle required, the more merits are required to deserve it. So it says, since Joseph was in more danger in his brother's hands than he would be in the pit, Reuben reasoned his chances were better in the pit. And that's how he got to be thrown into the pit. So then it says, in the meantime, a caravan of Midianite merchants passed by and hauled Yosef up from the pit, and they sold Yosef to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And then he was in turn sold to the Midianites, and they brought Yosef to Egypt. So it says, we're going to study about the brothers selling Yosef for 20 pieces of silver. Well, hi, from Portland. So 20 coins, and these 20 coins equal an amount called 100 gera, which was a monetary amount, which is the equivalent of 5 shekels. And because the brothers sold Yosef, Rachel's firstborn, the Jewish people in the future would be commanded to redeem each of their firstborn. And since they sold him for 5 shekels, their firstborn would have to be redeemed for the same price. So when a couple has a firstborn son, and neither of the parents are a Levi, or the father is not a Levi or a Kohen, then that child has to be redeemed from a Kohen. And my son Yosef, we had to buy him back from the Kohen. And actually, I have to say, the Kohen that we bought him back from for 5 silver shekels was a man named Leber Katz, who also used to live in LA. And by divine providence, his grave is the one right next to my husband in Sfat. So, you can't make these things up, but he was the Kohen in Los Angeles that we redeemed my son Yosef, and I'm very happy we redeemed Yosef. We've been very happy with him over the years. So this is a custom of 5 silver coins equaling the 5 shekels. And if we divide the 20 coins that Yosef was sold for, the 20 pieces of silver, by the 10 brothers that were involved in the sale, each brother contributed 2 coins, which is equal to the measurement of 10 gera, or half a shekel. So the Jewish people were required to donate a half shekel every year to the temple as an atonement for the sale of Yosef. So, we know that we have this 5 shekels that we give to the Kohen to redeem our the sons for. And we know that there is a kind of a tax of a half a shekel. But this is the origin of where these come from. And the sale effect on Yosef was ultimately positive, because what happens is he became so-called the property of his brothers in the Holy Land, and it prevented him from becoming the property of Egypt, which enabled all Jews to spiritually transcend the sovereignty of Egypt. And it says and we redeem this, we have this redemption of the firstborn, and the message of the commandment is everything we have belongs to God, just as Joseph belonged to his brothers in the realm of holiness. And it says that the sales effect on the brothers was that there was a spiritual blemish that was caused by their hatred and jealousy. And to rectify this blemish, we have the commandment of the half shekel, which, what is the half shekel used for? It's used to buy communal sacrifices, and it shows that there needs to be unity in the community. And this half shekel rectifies this sale of Yosef. And also symbolically, the half shekel means that we are all half and incomplete, and we only become whole by uniting with others. So this is to encourage us to have unity and love among the Jewish people, which will undo the selling ultimately of Yosef, which was caused by hatred and jealousy. Okay, we're moving along. 1 second. 258. You know, there's so many different chumashim that are available, and so many different commentaries, and so many different ways to use them. You know, and if anybody wants a suggestion, you can see me, email me, olivia@highcenter.org, and I'll give you suggestions of what's user-friendly and really can give you the broadest commentaries in English because we are English speakers, most people watching this, that will really open up the Chumash for you in a very deep way, in a very different way. And it's all available on the computer also. But on Shabbos, you don't want to be using the computer for learning your Chumash. Okay. So we're going on to say Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, who was officer of Paro and chief of his butchers, a prominent Egyptian, had bought him as a slave. Okay? So it says, what is Egypt? Egypt was a place where godliness was drastically concealed, and it was unlikely that the Jews would be able to survive the Egyptian exile spiritually intact, and they would not be able to fulfill their purpose if that is what was happening, which is to elevate the sparks of holiness that were embedded within Egypt. And we know that they reached the 49th degree of impurity, and God had to rip them out of Egypt. So God arranged for Joseph to descend to Egypt first and to weaken the evil of Egypt through the rise of his greatness there, which enabled the Jews eventually to be taken out of Egypt. And it says that in the beginning they flourished in Egypt, but they always remained separate from the Egyptian culture. And Joseph was able to elevate many holy sparks that were embedded in Egypt, and he enabled the Jewish people to complete their task quickly, well, relatively quickly. They remained in Egypt only 210 years. They were supposed to remain 400 years, so they remained 190 years less than they were supposed to. And the bitterness time of enslavement was for 86 years. And what do we know about Joseph's descent to Egypt? It echoes the descent of the soul from the holiness of the heavens to the mundaneness of the earthly existence. And it says that it's a plunge for the soul. I remember once learning many years ago that it said for a soul to come into a body is like if you have a shoe and you have a foot, and you're trying to fit your foot into a shoe that's a little bit too small, and you have to kind of force it in. The soul doesn't want to leave the heavenly realm. It doesn't. It's basking. It's basking in holiness up there. So it says that Joseph had been taken down to Egypt and he ruled over Egypt. And through the soul's descent, it can then rule over anything that conceals godliness. So that is the purpose of the descent, as we said before. The purpose of the descent is to reveal the sparks of holiness that are within the concealment and obstruction of the material. And the whole story of Yosef is the story of the Jews in exile. That Yosef was torn away from his family and he was thrown into an alien world. And then Yaakov lived in Haran. And it says, but Yosef's isolation was even more distressing than Yaakov's, because Yaakov was mature. He was 40 years old when he went. Yosef was only 17 when he was taken to Egypt. Yaakov was able to establish his own home, his own family. He lived separate from Lavan the wicked, and he could live his life. It says, remember we learned last week, I lived with Lavan and I kept all the 613 mitzvahs. But Joseph was taken as a slave, and then he was a prisoner, and he had one hardship after the other. And then he was loyal to Potiphar, and then he refused to give in to Potiphar's wife. And how was he repaid for all the hard work he did? He was thrown in jail. And then in jail, he interprets the dreams of the baker and the butcher, and then they forget about him. That was his reward. So you would think he said, that's it. I'm fed up with everything. I'm going to go in solitude. I'm going to seek revenge. But he didn't. He focused on only moving forward. That Kabbalah's all that we've been talking about all night is that moving forward, bearing the yoke of heaven, sanctifying God's name in everything he did. So how was he able to do this? How was he able to have that inner strength and fortitude to be able to live this way? It says that he reviewed constantly what he studied with his father, and he connected himself to this spiritual strength, and he was able to forge ahead. And we have to, like Yosef, keep our eye on our divine mission to bring light into the world, despite the darkness, despite the disappointments, and even injustices. We have to continually bring light into the world. So it goes on to say that we're now back to Potiphar's wife, that she caught hold of him by his garment and said, "Sleep with me." She wasn't. And that he left his garment in her hand and he fled. So it says that how did he flee? He saw a vision of his father's face. And Joseph was a servant. So he was at the mercy of Potiphar's wife. And she was threatening him that she would go to her husband, and she was threatening him with death and all kinds of things. So it says that he saw a vision of his father's face and he fled. And he went outside. So the inner Kabbalah of that teaching is that every physical phenomenon is a reflection of something godly. So physical beauty comes from divine beauty. And physical beauty, of course, cannot compare to divine beauty. And so when Yosef was confronted by Potiphar's wife's beauty, he reminded himself of divine beauty. And he fled and went outside, meaning he fled and went outside the physical realm to a place where physical beauty doesn't exist. And how do we know that? It's alluded to by the fact he saw a vision of his father's face. And Jacob was the embodiment of the divine attribute of beauty, which is called Tiferes, or mercy. And we're told that Jacob's face resembled the face of Adam, the first human. And it says why? Because Jacob finished the process of rectifying the sin of Adam, and Abraham started to rectify it, and Isaac started to rectify it, and Jacob completed that rectification. And so when Joseph saw the face of Jacob, he was reminded, what is our divine mission? Is to bring holiness into the world, is to rectify the sin of Adam, and such we cannot say that our individual sins are our own private business, because it says they can affect the moral balance of reality. And I think that's what we're seeing in the world. We're seeing, that there has been so much personal, individual corruption and pollution on so many levels in the world, and everybody thought, oh, I'm doing my thing. I can do what I want. And it doesn't matter. It's not going to have an effect on the world. But today, the whole world is affected. And that the moral balance of all reality is in effect, and everybody has an ability to uplift it or to contribute to bringing it down. So we are also in our lives at times, I know this is going to come as a shock, confronted with a temptation to commit a sin. And we could probably rationalize for ourselves, nobody will know, nobody will see, what's the difference? And it's only temporary, and we can go on and on. So it says that, and it could add to our goodness in the future. If I'm happy today, maybe I'll do a good deed tomorrow. So we have to envision this image of our forefathers and foremothers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and remember our own deeds are not isolated deeds of individual actions, but we can have, and they do have a cosmic implication, and they can harm or heal the entire world. So that's on the Parsha, and I would like to continue and do a very small bit on Hanukkah, and then next week. Then next week we'll do more on Hanukkah, because it will be Hanukkah. So I want to say a few things about Hanukkah, and I'm going to just say a few things about the commandments of Hanukkah. So Hanukkah starts tomorrow night. Tomorrow night is the first night of Hanukkah. It's Thursday night, and it goes for 8 nights. And the way we light the menorah, which is an 8 candelabra of 8 containers, and one more, 9 for the shamash, is that each night we add another candle, and we're going to study a little bit about it, and that we put in the candles from the right side to the left side. So just imagine, I should have brought up a menorah, but my trusty assistant is not here. I actually don't have an assistant. Okay, so let's say this is the menorah. Now, you're going to be backwards, and I'm going to be frontwards. I'm not so smart as to figure this out. But let's say this is the menorah, and let's say this is my right. It's probably your left looking at me, but just trust me, this is my right. So the first candle I would light here on my right. The second night, I would put 2 candles in, going from right to left. The third night, I would put 3 candles in, going from right to left, until I do all 8 candles from right to left. The way you read Hebrew, that's the way to remember. But when you light the candles, you light from left to right. So the first night, I light 1 candle. The second night, I light 2 candles, but I light the new candle first and then the old candle second. The blessings, you can go on Chabad.org and find the blessings. There are 3 blessings for the first night, and then every other night it's 2 blessings. If you don't know the blessings, Lahadlik Ner Shel Hanukkah, and then there's one on the miracle of the military victory, and then there's the Shekiano. But it's all, if you go on Chabad.org and you press Hanukkah. And Hanukkah is one of the deepest and most meaningful of all holidays. And we light the candles around sunset time, but they can be lit any time at night. And that the custom is to light them so that they shine to the outside. it's good that every family member is home when they're lit. Only one menorah needs to be lit in the house for all family members. That not everybody has to light a menorah. And you can have a sense when you're lighting the menorah that you're drawing down this light of holiness, of the miracles that happen. And we're going to learn about some of the miracles. And it says we light at the darkest time of year. This is the darkest time of the year. And in the midst of darkness, we light this holy light. And we know that light preceded creation. So it says that when the world was created, there was a light, a spiritual light that was created at that time. And then that light existed for 36 hours and it retracted with the sin of Adam and Eve, that it retracted. And it was put aside for the righteous in the future. So it says that we have 36 lights of Hanukkah. So if you add up the total for all 8 nights, you have 36 lights altogether. And those 36 lights are connected to the 36 hidden righteous people that exist in every generation. And that is light connected to this light called Organuz, the 36 hours of this first light that was created in the world. And we focus on the light we want to see clearly. That's the blessing, that we want to see clearly, and that it should illuminate our eyes. So I want to do a little teaching first, and then I will tell you another story. So one of the things from the Lubavitcher Rebbe was talking about dreams. So he said, when a person will find themselves in a situation after sunset, when the light of a day has given way to gloom and darkness, as was the case in the ancient days under the oppressive Greek rule, one must not despair, but on the contrary, it is necessary to fortify oneself with complete trust in God, the essence of goodness, and take heart in the firm belief that darkness is only temporary, and it will soon be surpassed by a bright light, which will soon be superseded by a brighter light, which will be seen and felt all the more strongly through the supremacy of light over darkness. So we know that when you have a totally dark room, and you strike a match, that tiny match has the ability to chase away darkness. So we're going to do one teaching only on Hanukkah, and then we're going to talk about chasing away the darkness. So on Hanukkah, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe would tell the Hasidim, we must listen carefully to what the candles are saying, and that the Hanukkah lights affects the entire scope of our service of God throughout the year. Why? Because a mitzvah is a lamp and Torah is light. And even though every mitzvah, every commandment can light up darkness in the material world, can release those sparks of holiness in the material world, that an illumination is different when it is actually associated with visible light. And I just want to show everybody my book. See all of these? All my books have my husband's writing all over them with his notes of what he thought was important and interesting. And it's always so exciting when I'm picking up a sefer, a book to teach, that the pages are full of his notes as well. In our family, we like to write in books. I remember going to college, and when you could write in a book, I was so excited, because my whole life, I couldn't, like, if I wanted to make a note, I was always afraid to turn down the page. But when I realized you can write, and every one of my books has writing, every book I have. So, anyway, okay. So, it says the spiritual implications of the Hanukkah lights are reflected in the details, and the halakha means the law, the details of the performance of the mitzvah. So, for example, the light should be kindled, meaning lit, after sunset and have to burn into the night. Oh, I want to say one more thing that's very important for Shabbos. So the menorah needs to be lit before the Shabbos candles are lit. And this week, candle lighting in Los Angeles is 4:33. I don't know what city, I know there are people here from Jerusalem. I think it's even earlier than that. So you have to see when the candle lighting is in your city. So if you have those short Hanukkah candles, and they're like the shortest kind they make in the different colors, not like the tall beeswax ones, but the short ones, they don't burn long enough when you light them by candle lighting on Shabbos. So you either need to get taller candles, or you can take tea lights, and since it's only 2 nights, you can put 2 in a row. They should be on the same level, 2 in a row, and you can light those for your Hanukkah lights because those will burn into the night. So very important, those little ones don't burn long enough on a Shabbos. Because you have to light them much earlier. So they have to burn into the night, and they should be placed at the outside of the entrance to one's home, which shows that really they were intended to light up the public domain. Now, many, many years ago, there was the public menorah lightings started that were encouraged by the Lubavitcher Rebbe for this exact reason, to illuminate the public domain rather than one's own home. And for anybody who does not know, the first public menorah lighting anywhere in the world that was done by a Chabad was in San Francisco, in Union Square, and the sponsor of that menorah, a huge menorah that was lit, and the whole event was Bill Graham. And for those who don't know, Bill Graham was the rock and roll promoter who owned all the Fillmore auditoriums and the Shoreline where the Grateful Dead performed. And he was really one of the modern promoters in the 60s of music. And he was the person who sponsored the first Hanukkah public lighting menorah anywhere in the world. I mean, it's just such a great tribute. And he was actually a child Holocaust survivor. And there is an interview somewhere of him in his past that was done by Hinda Langer. She should have a bracha for Refuah Shlema, and Hinda Yehudi Ben Bas Kaylee, and she'll be rocking and rolling pretty soon. And she has an interview with him, but really on the merit of Bill Graham, that his neshama should have the highest aliyah because it set the tone. It actually, it set the tone. It just set the tone for the future for menorah lightings. And there have been thousands all over the world. So it says that the darkness of night and public domain represent aspects of our material existence which obscure godly light and prevent us from appreciating unity. And when we kindle Hanukkah candles, we generate light which elevates the material realm and reveals its godly nature. So the positive commandments of the Torah affect only things that are fit to be elevated, meaning that the commandment cannot be fulfilled with materials that are not kosher. And it says that negative commandments negate the influence of things that are not kosher, but the Hanukkah candles, which are kosher, are able to refine and elevate the darkness of the public domain and causing it to shine with godly light, meaning to make spirituality more apprehended by us. That's the public display of the menorah. And the unique power of the Hanukkah lights is linked to the nature of the miracle that it commemorates. The miracle of Hanukkah took place in a time of darkness, when the Greeks had conquered the land of Israel and wanted to impose their culture upon the inhabitants. And it says that there were Jews, the Hellenists, that assimilated, but the Maccabees didn't. And they were able to instill in the Jewish people this quality we've talked about before of Mesiras Nefesh, of self-sacrifice, and tshuva, to return to God. And this inspired them to fight the Greeks, defeat them, and rededicate the Beis Hamikdash. And it says that the Jewish victory involved transforming darkness into light. And the Hanukkah lights, which we light to commemorate this, also have this power. And when we gaze at our Hanukkah lights, we can meditate on the miracles in our life and to draw down that level of miracle after miracle that have happened for the Jewish nation. And it teaches us, when confronted with darkness, we cannot resign ourselves to darkness. We can't only remain content to light up our own homes. We have to spread light as far as possible until the public domain is illuminated. And there is a Hanukkah song, a Hanukkah hymn, it's in our prayers, called Haneros Hallelu. And it talks about these lights are holy and we are not permitted to make use of them, only to gaze at them. So it says that this is why we have the 9th candle. This is why we have the shamash. So in case we are using the light for anything, we can say it's really that we're using the shamash. And it says that each mitzvah has a reward. And in this case, it's spiritual. And the visible light of the Hanukkah candles indicates the positive effect that's generated by this mitzvah in the material world and the spiritual world. And we fulfill it, why? Because we say in our prayers, you have sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us without any thought of reward or any ulterior motive. We are serving God for the service of God. That's it. And this can be achieved through our spiritual endeavors. Even our divine service can be motivated for a desire for the spiritual. So the Hanukkah lights teaches us to transcend our tendencies towards self-interest and dedicate ourselves to serving God for his sake alone. And the fact that the lights burn into the darkness demonstrate that we can reach an advanced level of divine service, not only during daylight, because godliness is more revealed in light, but also in times when effort is necessary to transform the darkness around us. And that is what we're in. We're in a time where we have the ability to transform the darkness around us. And in our relationships, in our communities, in the world, and what is going on, we have an opportunity to transform. And we add one candle every night. Every mitzvah we adorn. It's called beautifying the mitzvah, even though if you could fulfill it with lighting one candle every night, but we add till we have all 8 nights lit to beautify the mitzvah. And it says, where do we learn this from? We learn it from the Maccabees, when they rededicated the temple. And it says that there was a menorah that stood in the Beis Hamikdash. And next week, I will go into the real meaning of the menorah. It was a 7-branched candelabra. That was called the menorah. And that it was kept lit with pure olive oil that was produced by the priests and the high priests. And according to Jewish law, it was ritually pure oil. But according to law, if there was not ritually pure oil, impure oil could be used. And it says the Maccabees refused to be satisfied with this minimal fulfillment of the mitzvah, and they wanted to do it in the most beautiful way. And when the temple was destroyed and all the oil was not destroyed, but it was defiled, meaning that the Greeks did not just like smash all the bottles and destroy the oil, they defiled it. I don't know exactly how. Maybe they put a little pig juice or other unmentionable things into that oil, but there was oil left in jars that had the seals broken, and they wouldn't use it. They searched and they searched and they searched and they searched because they wanted to do the mitzvah as beautifully as possible. And they decide and why was the miracle for 8 nights? So they found a little bit of oil that should only have lasted for 1 night. And it lasted for 8 nights. And what is the significance of it lasting for 8 nights? Because in the natural order, not in the miraculous, but we learned from the Alter Rebbe last week that the miracles should be within the nature. And in the natural order, a single cruse of oil could only last 1 day, but it would take 8 days to produce new oil. That's how long it took to crush the olives and to produce new oil. And so that the oil burnt for as long as it took to produce new oil. And it says that when we light a candle every night, it teaches us that every day we have to increase in our endeavor to spread light throughout the world. Even though we lit up our environment the previous night, even at this level of beautifying the mitzvah, we can't rest on that. We need to always advance higher in holy manners, and that's why we increase the light every night. And these lessons that we learn from the Hanukkah light should be applied in every aspect of our lives. Every day we should go further. We should learn more and more. There are opportunities for growth, for kindness, and hopefully it will bring about the ultimate light and in the world, which is Mashiach. And the Hanukkah is bound to the era of redemption by the number 8, which is the number of nights we light the Hanukkah candles, and a number that is associated with being above nature. So this is an anticipation, and there are other amazing things that we're going to learn about Hanukkah. I mean, I really could stay up all night and teach it, but I'm not going to. I mean, about the Greeks and why they had the bad, I'll just give you a little hint. And then I want to tell you a very interesting story. So the Greeks, it wasn't that they were opposed to, they weren't into killing the Jews. It's not like the Nazis that came and let's wipe out the Jews. They wanted the Jews to remain Greek, but they wanted them to be Greek. So they wanted them to Amelie, hi, I'm so excited, one of my favorite students. So they wanted the Jews to keep Judaism, but they didn't want them to be attached to God. And we're going to learn about that next week, about the different levels of the mitzvahs. They wanted them to do the mitzvahs like blowing the shofar, shaking the lulav, but they didn't want them to do mitzvahs that had to do with a deep connection to God, like circumcision, like keeping kosher, like keeping Shabbos, things of that nature. But we'll study about that next week. So I heard a very interesting story, and it's about turning darkness into light. And I just feel that first of all, I really want to ask everybody to write your friends, neighbors, congressmen and women who are Jewish and ask them to please light candles, to light up the darkness more than ever before. The darkness needs to be lit up. And what could be better than Hanukkah light all over, and to publicize the miracle. And publicizing the miracle is not only for the Jews. Publicizing the miracle is to give courage and strength, even to the non-Jews of the world, to stand up for what they believe in, that you can stand up and you can be successful. And really, we know that the battles that took place, the Greeks were huge numbers, and the Maccabees were very small, and it was the small against the big. And guess what? The small won. and they were able to defeat them. And the stories are very detailed. And it was a time of a lot of difficulty, because there were the Jews that were the Hellenists that were willing to give up their Judaism and, do just what the Greeks wanted them to do. And then there were those who were devoted to God and just said, we cannot do that. We can't live that way. And Judah and Maccabee stood up, and the battles started, and the Jews were able to win, but they could not give in to demoting God out of the picture, so to speak. So we live in a time that is, personally, we have beautiful days and we have beautiful moments, but it is a time of darkness for the world. It's a time of uncertainty. There are many people that are suffering on many, many different levels, and whoever is suffering, their suffering should be lifted immediately, to good. And darkness has been all around us and is still all around us, but there is light in the darkness, and we need to see the depth and the divine providence. So this is a story that I heard from Rabbi Brander, and if anybody wants, Rabbi Brander teaches 15 minutes every morning. 15 minutes, it's perfect. You think, oh, you're learning Torah, and it's 15 minutes, and it's so easy, and it's deep, and it's exciting, and it's thrilling. So if anybody would like the link to his site, it's from 5 of 8 in the morning to 10 after 8. But it's always late, so it's from 8 to 8:15. But it's Jewish, that's why it's late. Okay, and this story he told, and he had just heard it, so I'm gonna have to read part of it and not tell it all, but I'm going to do my best to give over the story in its proper manner to honor the people it happened to. So it's called The Story of the Dunera. So one of the things in the Gemara, one of the books of our teaching, it says that we should have canceled Hanukkah. Wow! The little children wouldn't like that. Why? Because Hanukkah comes from part of a book that was called Megillas Tanit, was the book of all minor holidays. So there was such a book of all minor holidays. So since we no longer have the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple, and we can't observe all these minor holidays, we got rid of the book. It doesn't exist anymore, the book of Megillas Tanit. I'm sure there's one around, but it's not something that I knew of before this story. And there were about 12 minor holidays in there, and Hanukkah was one of the holidays that was in there. So the Gemara asks the question, shouldn't Hanukkah be canceled? And it says that not only is it not canceled, but it's a mitzvah to observe Hanukkah. So it says, why wasn't it canceled? Because the mitzvah of Hanukkah has a specific mitzvah. And what is that specific mitzvah? Publicizing the miracle. That we light on the outside till the people are and it says we light till like the passers-by, the people shopping, the people in the streets are no longer in the streets, are no longer walking outside. And there was a rabbi in Yerushalayim, he was called the Brisker Rebbe, the Brisker Rav, and he asked the question, when did the Edison Theater, apparently it was a theater in Jerusalem, when does it show its last movie? When do people leave? Well, obviously he wasn't asking it because he was going to the theater, but he was told the last people go out at 12. So he made sure that there were menorahs lit till then, because it says that the last people are in the streets. So it says, and Rabbi Soloveitchik, who is a very well-known Rebbe, says it's not only for Jews, but also for non-Jews. It's showing the world to have courage to stand up. And in the Al Hanisim, which we say in our prayers, in our daily prayers, we say it's a prayer about the miracle of Hanukkah. It says you made this as a salvation for the whole world. It doesn't just say for Jews, but for the whole world. And Rambam says that even if you are totally poor, you should sell your shirt to have money to buy Hanukkah candles. That's how important Hanukkah is, even though it's a fun day. It's a fun holiday. And we have to show the world that even though we don't have the Holy Temple, and even though we live in a time of darkness, we remind ourselves, and here's really the beautiful line, that God is found in the darkness. And we have to be able to look, and we have to be able to see. And we take strength from Hanukkah. And it says that we took strength from that to get from the second temple, which was destroyed, to the third temple, which will be rebuilt. And this lesson of Hanukkah is to strengthen all of us. So it's not just a cute holiday. It's not just that we're just going to, have some candles that are lit. It's really to give strength to us in the world. And we should really try our hardest this Hanukkah when we light, to draw strength and to really ask friends, neighbors, relatives that people should be lighting. So this story, I think, is such a profound example of taking darkness and how darkness can be turned into light, and how there is divine providence even in the midst of terrible darkness. So it says that in 1940, England allowed about 70,000 Jewish refugees, 70,000 refugees, many, many Jews, to come to Britain. And they were treated very well. And then in May of 1940, Germany invaded France and Holland and Holland and Belgium. And then the British public became very afraid that there was going to be a German invasion of England. And one of the reasons it was felt that the Germans were so successful in these other countries was because they had what was called a fifth column in these countries, meaning many internal German citizens, people from Germany, lived in these countries, which allowed possibly them to get a foothold in these countries. So now in Britain, there were thousands, over 70,000 Germans in Britain, and they became very frightened that they would lead to the Nazis being successful in invading England. And so they were rounded up, and they were given a choice to be deported or to remain in internment camps, in detention camps. And many wanted to leave, because, especially the Jews, because they were afraid that if the Germans would come into England, they would be captured also, and it would not be good. So the largest group of these people and the largest group of this camp was in Liverpool, England. And on July 10th, the HMD Dunera, Dunera, was a boat, and it set sail. And they didn't tell the passengers. None of the passengers knew where they were going. And the boat could have held maybe 1,600, and there were more than 2,000 crammed in. And of that group of the 2,000, they were all Jews. Basically, they were all Jews. But there were also two other groups on the ship. There were 261 German Nazis and 200 Italian fascists that were on the ship also, that had been interned in camps, and want to be sent out of England. And the crew was made up of criminals, of people that were criminals in England that were given the opportunity, if they would become crew on this ship, then they would have their freedom at the end of the they would be pardoned at the end of the trip. And so the voyage was 57 days. And this crew were sadists. They were cruel. They were vile people. And they kept all the Jews crammed below deck, never allowed for 57 days on the upper deck to the fresh air. There was barbed wire and armed guards to keep them from coming up. They were served moldy food, terrible food. There was dysentery. There was seasickness. I mean, one cannot even probably imagine what it was like. And in addition to being the crew being so cruel, they threw all the valises of the Jews overboard that contained their life possessions, correspondence, clothes, pictures, medicines, and anything that they possessed. Everything was thrown overboard. Everything was thrown overboard just for the cruelty of it all. And they were to fill in everything, and it was very sad. It was very discouraging. And after this torturous ride, the boat landed on Rosh Chodesh Elul, and they let off the fascists, the Italian fascists and the Nazis, and they were taken to a certain camp outside of Melbourne, an internment camp called Tatora. And then the ship went on to Sydney. And when the Jews got off the ship at Sydney, the officials in Australia were shocked because they thought they were getting prisoners. They thought they were getting also prisoners, like German prisoners, like the Nazis and the fascists were, and they didn't realize that these were Jews that were escaping their fate. And so they immediately fed them, and they did everything they could to build them up and gave them food and all kinds of different things. And then they took them by train to a camp, also a detention camp that had been prepared for them to stay because they were still officially prisoners of Britain. Because they were German, so they took them to a camp in the outback. And the person who was telling this story, it was his father's story, was saying that there were kangaroos hopping along. It was really Australia, the outback of Australia. And they arrived in a place that was hot, and it was very difficult. But what did the people do when they got there? This is just so moving, is that they organized themselves into like groups for learning. Like, these were Jews, they were educated, they were talented. There were professors, there were all kinds of talents, and they made makeshift universities, and they had a kosher kitchen, and they had discussion groups, and they made a newspaper, and they even had a Haggadah that they wrote from memory, and then they mimeographed off so everybody could have a copy for Passover. And the day right after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the British freed them from the camp, gave them pardons, that they were Jews, that they were not Nazis, and freed them, and called them friendly aliens. And they gave them permission to travel back to England, but it was too dangerous. Nobody wanted to travel the seas and go back to England. So some people joined the Australian Army, and there was a farm, and the farms were called a station. And there was a farm that was owned by this man, this well-known Chabad Chassid. His name was Rabbi Moshe Feiglin, and he employed many of these people and taught them how to be self-sufficient and how to make a community and how to live, and many of them stayed there. So that's basically the story of the ship Dunara and these 2,000 Jews' fate. Now, that's the background for the Hanukkah part of the story. So in 1980, there was a captain of one of the U-boats. The U-boats were German boats that could also be submarines that sunk enemy boats and were very dangerous. And anybody trying to escape by sea, any of the countries, because they patrolled all the waters around Europe and even further, and they were bombing ship after ship after ship out of the water. And so all their logs were closed. But in 1980, there was the death of one of the ship captains, and his logbook was open to the public and able to be read. And in his book, he told the story of his U-boat, which was U-boat, I think 56, some number, whatever it was. And he said that his boat shot shot torpedoes many times at this ship Dunera. And as it was on its way, moving through the waters from England to Australia. And he writes that he shot a torpedo and it was a direct hit on the boat with the 2,000 passengers, and the torpedo failed to explode. So then he said, fire 2. And he fired another torpedo, and it says that hundreds of passengers were looking at this torpedo that was about to land again on the ship and would have blown up the whole entire ship. But a big wave came and lifted the ship up on the swell, and the torpedo went underneath the ship into the water right before it made contact and would have sunk the ship. So this captain of this U-56, he couldn't believe it. And he wrote in his logbook he couldn't believe he missed the second torpedo also. So he submerged as a submarine, and he waited for dark. And then he was going to come up at dark and attack. And he resurfaced for air. And when he resurfaced before it was time to attack, several of the crew members saw many items. Then the sea had become calm, and they saw many items floating on the sea and things that he sees that are being thrown off the ship, and the ship doesn't see them. And he takes out some of these valises and he brought them on board, and he opens them and he found clothing with labels from German stores and books in German and correspondence and letters written in German. And he believed it was a ship full of German nationals. Now, a few months before, there was another ship that was sunk by a U-boat captain, and it was a ship full of German citizens. And the whole country was in an uproar about how dare they make such an error and kill their own citizens. So all captains of U-boats were warned that they have to be very careful that they're not going to blow up a ship that has German citizens on it. And when he saw all of these things in German, he assumed that these were all loyal German nationals. And so he radioed every U-boat that was in the waters, saying not to harm the Dunera. And then what did he do? They escorted this ship out of the dangerous waters. And it's interesting because all the Jews at the time that their possessions, their beloved things were thrown over the board, thought that such a darkness upon darkness upon darkness happened to them. But really, ultimately, God was protecting the Jews. And that the crew was sadistic and threw their things overboard. But if not for the fact that their possessions and their belongings were thrown overboard, 2,000 Jewish lives would have been lost. So I wanted to share that story because it's a story of turning darkness into light. Of the whole story of the Germans and the Nazis is dark, but the fact that these people were saved by a miracle in a time of total darkness gives us the courage that what we are going through today, we will overcome, and we will overcome with Mashiach, and we will overcome because light can dispel darkness. So we all have to have a smile on our faces, and we have to bring joy to our friends, family, and those we don't know. And we have to light up the outer world. This is our task. This is what we have to do. So I want to wish everybody a very happy Hanukkah. And my Hanukkah plans are to be in my backyard and to light up my backyard. And I teach a few outdoor classes, and there are some public menorah lightings in places in Los Angeles. People are going to be in their cars, and whatever, but we're not stopping. We're lighting up the darkness. We're not stopping. Nothing's going to stop us. So I want to wish everybody a happy Hanukkah and a blessed week. And I will see you next Wednesday night when it actually is Hanukkah. And then I'll show you all my Hanukkah presents. Okay. No, nobody should get me a present. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for coming to the class. I appreciate it.